Good afternoon. Today's theme, in my opinion, is extremely relevant. Why? Because as mankind develops, mankind has accumulated both the experience of the development of the world understanding and the experience of blocking this world understanding. If we analyze the last 3,000 years, then the starting point of this process can be considered 1375 BCE, when there was a serious interaction between the two ancient Egyptian hierarchies of Amun and Aton. And then tendencies for the formation of some hermetic knowledge began to accumulate, and artificial algorithms of blocking of world understanding for those who do not possess such hermetic knowledge. Therefore, when you analyze everything that is happening in Russia, the questions of world understanding become perhaps most acute, because there are indeed a lot of paradoxes. The average inhabitant of our country is 30 times richer than the average inhabitant of the planet Earth. That is, if we take gas, the first place in terms of supplies to the world market, 33%, oil, the second place after Saudi Arabia, gold, the second place after the Republic of South Africa, timber, us in Brazil, there is practically no commercial timber anywhere else, 45% of pines grow in Russia, and how to combine all this with the fact that our people drag out a miserable, sometimes beggarly existence. That is, apparently, something in the big picture is not right here. This is not a question of miscalculations in some kind of economic theories, errors of some ideological developments. No. Apparently, this is the problem of the absence of a global world understanding. That is precisely why such a lecture, I think, is extremely relevant. I want to say that the methods of blocking the real world understanding, they have been worked out long ago, and the best people of the planet Earth have comprehended them long before you and me. When you prepare some material, you just come across such quotes, which are very relevant. And only yesterday I read one link, which I will quote in fragments. Gautama Buddha, 600 BCE. I quote verbatim. Do not trust what you have heard, don't trust traditions, don't trust the rumors and opinions of the majority, don't consider that to which you are accustomed to be true. After observation and analysis, when it is consistent with reason and contributes to the good and benefit of one and each, then accept it and live according to it. This is an extremely deep and important thought. If a person begins to focus on the opinion of the majority, he falls out from the process of a serious global world understanding. Because it is precisely the opinion of the majority that is, as a rule, erroneous and artificially imposed. Here, right before the lecture, I was already asked the question, what is the point in this? Who needs to block the world understanding? The answer is simple. According to the data of the Reuters agency, today, life on the globe is arranged in such a way that 351 family clans have 45% of everything produced on the globe. The remaining 6 billion have the other half. It is precisely for this that it's done. A certain pyramid is built on the globe. From the point of view of knowledge and information, and from the point of view of finance, it is built in parallel. That is, there is a certain top that knows everything, and there is a crowd that it is important to disorientate. And then this crowd will be ethnographic raw materials that can be used for their own purposes. This is how the world works. And if you do not understand this, if you don't understand these schemes in relation to our country, then everything else is petty vanity. We are all divided into separate technological complexes. Here are chemists, here are physicists, here are special services. We do not even have a language of interdisciplinary communication. That is, as a whole, no one analyzes anything. Everyone is responsible for their own maneuver. This is the same as if we are on a ship. Each has his own cockpit, and everyone is told, where you are going, you equip your cockpit, and whether the ship is going to the reefs or to the bottom, it is not your question. This is approximately the situation we are in today. Today I will try to give you a lot of concrete, practical advice. But before moving on to this real practice, just a few introductory words from the conceptual apparatus. I do not classify myself as a theoretician, therefore I am not trying to go out to any strict definitions. If something interests you, you can look in encyclopedias. I would like to present all this at the level of really understanding these processes on a large scale. To complete the introduction, I will refer to other no less authoritative persons, in particular the Russian prophet Pushkin. You know that Pushkin had quite serious ideas about crowd elitism, and he repeatedly touches upon this in his works. You recall, graze, if you will, you peaceful nations, who never rouse at honor's horn. Should flocks heed freedom's invocations, their part is to be slain or shorn. Their dower the yoke their sires have worn, through snug and sheepish generations. Pushkin very rarely spoke openly. All of Pushkin's works are encoded information about the principles of the ways of governance towards the globe. But sometimes he spoke openly. He spoke openly, in particular, about the press. "'Tis to me of no concern whether the press be free to dupe poor oafs, or whether censors cramp the current fancied of some scribbling scamp." All other works of Pushkin are encoded images, just as you read the fables of Krylov. If a child reads and sees a fox, a crane there, then when you read you have different associations. The so-called second semantic line arises. In the same way, all of Pushkin's works, behind any image that is presented in the so-called Pushkin fairy tales, there stands a certain social global phenomenon. If Krylov presented it at the level of human characters, then Pushkin presents it at the level of global social phenomena. For example, Ruslan and Lyudmila. He sometimes wants us to understand the meaning of his works. Lyudmila. These are dear people, Slavic peoples. Where were they taken with the help of the beard, the famous symbol of the credit financial system? To the country of the Midnight Mountains, Switzerland, and so on. In order to understand how the world understanding is formed, what a culture of thinking is, we will start from scratch. A child was born. Here is the first day. He has just appeared. And as he develops, we will then more fully understand what he is. Often specialists even have the idea that here is a person, this is a head, here is consciousness, and that's it. What else to look for there? You will agree with me that when a person is born, when an animal is born, and when a mosquito is born, then each of them has fundamentally different brain capabilities. This is what he is born with. This is the so-called Winchester disk drive, if we speak in modern terminology. So the Winchester, everyone has his own from birth. And not only is it different in a mosquito and in a person, but each person has his own Winchester. One has something recorded on his Winchester, another has something else. The Winchester is the property of ancestral genetics. Ancestral genetics fully provides content of the Winchester with which the child was born. Is the Winchester everything? No, it is not everything. If the child continues to perceive the world through the wolf pack, as an example, Mowgli, then from him a person will never be formed. If you place a creature potentially prepared to become a human in different conditions, and he perceives the world differently than all other people, he will never be human. And if this stage has passed, then it is simply impossible in principle to turn him into a human. Thus, the Winchester disk drive is just a foundation. What further? Further, in the person, a second system, the so-called operative memory, is activated. This is the human brain or consciousness. When a child is born, he does not know how to speak, but he knows how to see, he knows how to hear, he knows how to sense. Using the example of a child, we see how these processes are formed. When communicating with the outside world, the child begins to form a worldview. What is a worldview? This is an idea of creation, but in a figurative form. That is, he cannot speak, he cannot say anything, but nevertheless, in a figurative form, certain ideas about creation are formed in him. And depending on what he sees, such a worldview begins to form in him. That is, if the pictures of the real world are replaced with television pictures and pictures from a computer, then you will form a person who is completely not adapted to the real world, because his ideas about the real world do not correspond to this world. If your child sees Earth only from a car window, something grey, then he will not have adequate ideas about creation, and, in fate, he will have a lot of all sorts of problems. Therefore, the most important thing to start with when upbringing a child is simply to take him by the hand, lead him to the clearing, show him the bugs, the spiders, how the grass grows, how the leaves grow, explain that the earth is not just such a grey mass, but it turns out to be a very complex formation, where there are a lot of things if you look closely and so on. This is how the worldview begins to form. That is, if you define the concept of worldview, then I named it as follows. It is a set of principles, views, beliefs that determine a person's relation towards the world around him and towards himself. That is, now the slogans are going around, take everything from life, Pepsi. This is a worldview. If a person has such a worldview, then in each concrete case he will act this way and not otherwise. If a person is presented in the form of a certain black box to which information is supplied, then the worldview will simply define. And what is the result? That is, information is fed to one box, one reaction, to another box, another reaction. And what is inside? This is the worldview. The worldview is formed, of course, by science and politics and aesthetics and raviousness, but the basis, as I said, the ancestral egregor, is stored in the form of worldview images. And here it is very important to understand that, in general, there are very different genotypes on Earth, and everyone has different world perception. There are people who write in hieroglyphs, there are people who write from right to left, there are people who write from left to right. All this has a very serious impact on the worldview. The questions that I will talk about today I verified in practice, especially the problems of higher reason, when we touch upon this. I checked this theme as well, at least on all our continents and in countries such as Japan, Indonesia, South Africa, Venezuela. Well, I'm not talking about Europe, the States, and so on. There is little meaningful that can be obtained for a deep world understanding. But when you try to get to the origins of ideas that were before the peoples were civilized by Europe, then you begin to understand a lot. For example, Japan. I understood that one can perceive through words and one can perceive through images. The Japanese perceive the world through images. That is, their hieroglyphs are a certain simplified picture of how one sees life in a figurative form. And I tried to somehow understand with an example. But how does this happen in life? So, our translator, who has been living there for 15 years, speaks excellently the purest Japanese language, being absolutely European in appearance. She says, I usually give such an example in order to understand the specifics of thinking. I approach a Japanese man, and in the purest Japanese I ask him something. For example, tell me how to get there or how to get somewhere. He looks at me with clear eyes and says, I'm sorry, I don't speak English. I repeat to him in the purest Japanese, I'm talking to you in Japanese. Explain to me. And he says, I told you, I don't speak English. He says to her in English. And only from the third approach does she achieve success. Why? Because the Japanese think through images, and their words are secondary. When a Japanese man reads the text, he sees the text. The meaning is clear to him, but he cannot read it. In order to read it, he must open the dictionary, look, etc. So, when he saw the face of this girl, then there is an image and there is a standard variant. If the face is European, the person does not speak Japanese, and that's it. Words for him already mean nothing. They are not perceived by him. He sees the image, and for him, the meaning of what is happening is already clear. He made a conclusion for himself and behaves like that. That is, if a person writes from right to left, then this is a fundamentally different character. If you write from left to right, then you see what you have written and do not see the line that you will write. It is closed with your hand. From here, certain character traits are formed when a person is more predisposed to the analysis of what was than to the analysis of what will be. If a person writes from right to left, then what he wrote is already covered by his hand. He does not see it. But the line that he writes, he clearly imagines what will happen next. That is, these seeming details very seriously affect a person's perception of creation as a whole. So you and I understand that a child's worldview is being formed, but he has no world understanding. He doesn't say anything. Why worldview? Because 95% of information a person perceives through the eyes, and only the remaining 5% through the rest of the senses. These are touch, smell, taste buds, hearing, and 95% through the eyes, hence worldview. This is not entirely accurate because the rest of the senses also work to form this property, but, nevertheless, the eyes are decisive here. So he does not have a world understanding. Why does the child have no world understanding? Because he has no lexicon. He sees, for example, a flame, and he knows that it's hot. But he knows this only at the level of images, and cannot express it in words. The word appears later in the child. A word is a kind of code, the main unit of language, which serves to name objects, events, phenomena of life. It is a code that is formed at the level of consciousness. But there is an image and there is a word. And it's very important to divide this from such a category as a concept. A concept is no longer words, it is no longer an image. A concept is a combination of words and images. Now, if there is a combination of a word and image, only then does a concept arise. For example, I say the word look to you. This is a word. But until the image appears, you have no idea. And I can tell you something further, but you won't understand what it's about. In general, what is this? Is it a look as a bow for shooting, or is it a look blooming in the meadow? Or is it a look as an onion, or green onions? That is, there are many variants of the word, no concept. And only when you combine this word with a certain image, then you will have a concept. If we talk about the world understanding directly, then the world understanding is precisely the worldview expressed in lexicon, It is a set of concepts. World understanding is always in lexicon. If a person cannot express something in lexicon, then he has no world understanding. Although he may have a world view, he can figure out what to do, but as they say, the eyes are smart but they cannot speak. These are such situations in life. This just suggests that in the given question there is no world understanding, although the world view can be quite deep. Recently I have been focusing on the problems of geopolitics, the problems of creating a complex conception of social safety of Russia. I've been doing this since at least 1989, after I had 3 direct meetings with Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev. And when I realized that he had a very vague idea of what was happening, I then worked as the secretary of the Leningrad City Committee and made a decision for myself to leave the system. I recused myself at the regional party conference because I realized that everything that is being done in the party system, it serves exclusively one thing: the concealment of those true algorithms that are implemented in life. Because everything that was said and everything that was done, it was linked, but with the accuracy up to the point of the opposite. If you remember all of Gorbachev's perestroika slogans, this is the acceleration of socio-economic development, a failure. This is the fight against drunkenness, the complete boozifying of the people. It, by the way, always goes through a ban. This is the friendship of peoples, we got a war. Check it for any thesis. This is psychological Trotskyism. Such a phenomenon is very ancient, but recently Trotsky was its most prominent representative. In words, one thing, by default, fundamentally different. All words are only to hide what is actually being realized. When I understood this scheme, I set for myself a personal objective: to understand and figure out how then is the world arranged. If, after all, I am the secretary of the Leningrad City Committee, this is not Shmirinka or some provincial town. I feel that I cannot impact what is happening in any way, and that I don't govern the process either here or in the country. I meet with Gorbachev and see that he has nothing to do with governance. How then is governance built? Actually, the last perhaps 15 years are devoted exclusively to this, in order to understand how the world is arranged. Therefore, world understanding allows you to form a national idea. What is a national idea? A national idea cannot be invented in some classrooms by some scientists. If this national idea is really functionally operable, it should fully reflect the world view that people have. That is, whoever thinks up what, no matter what pictures they try to form on television, we have centuries-old genetics. It cannot be exterminated in one generation, not in 2 or even in 3. And this world view is there anyway. Here you look. The image of Ivanushka the Fool. What is this? He is such an interesting, curious hero for our people. Why? Because, in fact, the world view that is among the people, it is expressed in pictures, in images, in folk tales, first of all, in proverbs and sayings. These things, by the way, are the most accessible. Children of 12 or 13 years old perfectly understand this all. They perfectly understand how creation is arranged. They perfectly understand what the higher reason is. They understand what the economy is, and understand how the Russian people are simply rudely thrown under the bus in modern terminology. And they can explain this to the Minister of Economy, the Minister of Finance. I'm convinced that if a third-year student and the Minister of Finance are put on television opposite one another, the Minister of Finance will look just ridiculous. This is true if a person has a real world understanding and not a slew of stereotypes. By the way, today the first article will be published, and in general, the whole series will result in a booklet, which will be called The Economic ABC for School Children, Housewives, Participants of Productive Labor, Ministers of Economy and Finance, where it will be shown in simple, popular language that economics is a concept of two words, household and rules. There are household rules. They should be in a family of 5 or in a state. Where have you seen a normal head of the family who would go and borrow money everywhere in such volumes that not he, nor his children, nor his grandchildren will be able to repay? And when this happens at the level of the country, then we have uncles who carry out these operations. They are also presented as national heroes. They gave him money there, they gave him money at the IMF, they gave him in England, gave him in France. As a result, the debt is $150 billion, and payments on it, if you take 10%, $15 billion per year. And take the state budget, well, about 20 billion. It is all so elementary. That is, if really tricky, complex schemes were built, we thought, pondered, judged, how is it? Why, in such a rich country, we exist in such a way? Well, this is all on the surface, so elementary that I say it again, for a 15 to 20-year-old school child and student, this is absolutely all clear. Another thing is that the information that we are promoting is very seriously blocked. But this is still hopeless. It is just a matter of time. This information propagates today well, at least in 60 regions of Russia, and so far it is not purpose-orientedly given in St. Petersburg and Moscow. These are two cities where this information is not yet being promoted for certain reasons. Thus, the world understanding is a matrix of interconnections in two spectra, the image and the word. And the expression of the world understanding is actions, behavior in response to the received information. That is, if the world understanding is one, the information has entered, the actions are one. The world understanding is different. This means that the actions will be different. Well, about the culture of thinking. What is culture? There is a collection of information in society that is not genetically transmitted. This is precisely what culture is. This is painting, music, sculpture, all other types of art. But when you look at our culture, you will see the dominance of biblical stories. Here, go to the Hermitage and have a look. 90% of all subjects will be on biblical themes. That is, what do we have? You and I have a biblical culture and the stemming from it biblical conception of governance, which is being implemented today in our country. I will not touch on the problems of conceptual power. This is a completely separate theme. It is very serious. If anyone is interested, I have several books with the title Conceptual Power, Myth or Reality, simply about the complex mechanisms of the ruin of Russia. I will leave them so that those who are interested can read. If culture is genetically non-transferable information, then the ability to assimilate cultural potential is genetically transmitted. That is, it depends on genetics. One has one ability to assimilate culture, while the other has others. It is in this that man differs from the animal world. In the animal kingdom, each of these specimens has the possibility to learn something only from their own kind, living nearby. That is, the kitten learns from its mother, but he cannot learn something from a cat that lived 30 years before him. This is in principle excluded. It is very important to understand that in order to form a literate world understanding, one should not try to go all the way from a monkey during his lifetime. For this, there is a culture in society, and each person has the possibility to learn a lot from the experience of all previous generations. And now, if he learns from the previous errors and mistakes, then he won't need to learn from his own mistakes. He can avoid them by mastering the previous ones. If we talk about the culture of thinking, then these are ways of processing information coming from the outside world into the psyche of man at its unconscious and conscious levels. Methods of processing of information are different for everyone. If we talk about dialectics, then this is precisely the methodology of processing of information. And now we will touch upon problems that are very important for practical life in general. The problems of the interrelationship between the consciousness and unconsciousness in the psyche of man. If we compare the possibilities of consciousness and the unconscious, then in one literature it says subconsciousness, in another superconsciousness. I use a different term. We say that these are the unconscious levels of the psyche. They cannot be put higher or lower. These are two systems interacting with each other. But of the fact that this is, sometimes even doubts arise about this. We are convinced by the example of a child, when he has no consciousness but already has something. Thus, in computer technology, consciousness is the operative memory, unconscious levels of the psyche are the hard drive. The possibilities of consciousness and unconscious levels of the psyche are fundamentally different from the point of view of information capacity and information processing speed. At the level of consciousness, a person is able to process information at a speed of 15 bits per second. That is, you can only imagine 15 pictures per second, but not more. The computer does not allow further. On this, as is known, the effect of a movie is built. When your picture appears 24 times per second, then you no longer see any of the pictures. You see a certain process, but you no longer distinguish the pictures. In addition, it is very important to understand that a person simultaneously, at the level of consciousness, can hold, depending on the intellectual abilities of the person, from 7 to 9 objects, and no more. That is, if you want to build any system of governance, you must understand this, that it's impossible to govern if you are dealing with more than 9 subjects. This is basically impossible. That is, you can't observe an integrity. That is, you have 25 regions. In one you need to reduce something, but you will not be able to provide how this will affect the rest. Therefore, very serious strategic decisions have been made recently at the level of the president. It seems to me that today this is a very serious understanding which should not be talked about. It would be wrong for certain reasons, but it's necessary to act according to purpose consonance. You can say only words, but purpose consonance is much more important. And so, when Putin introduced 7 districts, this is a fundamental strategic decision. If 89 subjects of the Federation are closed on the head of state, this is an inherently ungovernable system. That is, it means that the one who heads the system, he does not govern anything. A completely different algorithmics operates, into which he may not even be initiated. When you have 9 subjects of the Federation, or 7, then you can talk about real governance. 7, I think, is also no coincidence. Probably there will be 8 or 9 in the future. I'll tell you a very important thought. Now we are translating a work. While I'm not talking about it, we are getting very serious information from abroad, including translating it. We will translate one work, which is essentially the methodological basis of the entire theory that is used by the US Central Intelligence Agency. So from there I will give only one thought. Think how deeply they understand. They serve the information like this. Consciousness is just a new service for the unconscious levels of the psyche. Therefore, if a person thinks that everything is decided at the level of consciousness, he will never succeed. Consciousness is just a new service for the unconscious levels of the psyche. All human capabilities lie in the possibilities of using the unconscious levels of the psyche. I have given you data on the possibilities of consciousness. The possibilities of consciousness and the possibilities of the Winchester, unconscious levels of the psyche, differ from each other by 10 to the 8th degree. This is approximately, if we take simpler visual images, like a drop of water in an ocean. These are the correlations between the possibilities of the conscious levels of the psyche and the unconscious levels of the psyche. And therefore, to expect that you can solve everything and ensure everything, if you don't understand something, you need to rely primarily on the unconscious levels of the psyche. Then there will never be success either in the corporation or with you specifically. The interaction of consciousness and the unconscious levels of the psyche, this also needs to be very clearly envisioned. Without delving into the theory of processes at the level of the theory of the brain, I'm trying to somehow present this in a figurative form. The interrelationship between consciousness and the unconscious levels of the psyche can be compared with the interrelationship between a pilot and an autopilot. Now, if your plane is flying, it can be governed by a pilot, but there is an autopilot. Autopilot capabilities are sometimes much more powerful than individual pilot capabilities. As an example, with our last IL plane that crashed near Irkutsk, this example suggests that had the autopilot been turned on, then there would have been no problems at all, but problems arose at the level of the pilot. There was a conflict situation and governance was lost. Therefore, it is very important to understand that we have a pilot and we have an autopilot. And you need to trust the autopilot very often. And it's very important because the autopilot has much more of an idea of what is happening than the pilot at the level of consciousness. There are two ways of developing a world understanding and assimilating by a person of everything that is on earth. You can try to pull everything that's included in the autopilot to the level of consciousness and assign everything to the pilot, and count only on him. This leads to processes like yoga. What is yoga? Yoga is an attempt to get everything out of the unconscious levels. These are simple practices, and if you sit and only do this around the clock, you can remember not only what happened yesterday, a year ago, but you can gradually reach the moment of birth and so on. You also have the soul, but you have the soul at the unconscious levels of the psyche, and yoga brings it all to the conscious levels of the psyche. And then what? And then the roof blows off, because the possibilities of consciousness are limited, and such people are already little adapted to real practical life. Another algorithmics is much more correct, when the pilot reserves only the most significant, including the improvement of the algorithms of the working of the autopilot. This belongs only to the pilot. That is, you can teach the computer to play chess, but still, it will play only to that degree to which it was taught by the one who programmed it. So it is here. All the possibilities of the unconscious levels of the psyche, or the possibilities of the autopilot, they are determined by the pilot. And the pilot should, instead of removing a whole group of functions from the autopilot, improve the algorithmics of the autopilot and develop his own capabilities without overloading his own brain. And of course, a system is also possible where consciousness can be turned off. And you know of cases when people, for example, having taken an excess share of alcohol, end up at home, but they don't remember how. They came home on autopilot. That is, consciousness did not work, and the unconscious levels of the psyche worked and brought the person home. Therefore, it is very important to understand these things, and to understand what sleep is. Sleep is one of the most crucial moments in a person's life. That is, you cannot treat sleep just anyhow. Sleep is the most serious and responsible job. What is sleep? During the day you perceive creation. All your senses work. You hear something, see something, remember something, smell some smells. When a person falls asleep, then within 4 hours from this very news service, as the CIA defines it, information is pumped to the unconscious levels of the psyche. There is an exchange of information, hard drive, operative memory. Everything is transferred from the operative memory to the hard drive. But it is not transferred just like that. There is already its own algorithmics. True, false, important, not important. That is, information is being archived. And everything that you saw during the day is all archived and laid down on the unconscious levels of the psyche in your memory. And if a person, again, let's say, went overboard in the evening, the next morning he does not remember why. Somehow it was not recorded. Therefore, for the first 4 hours, there is a re-recording of what happened during the day. And then there is a prophylaxis and preventative treatment of these symptoms. And only after that, the interaction of consciousness with the unconscious levels of the psyche stops, and consciousness, as it were, opens. It is open, and these are the most important moments of a person's life, if you understand this. Many say that they wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. It should be so. As soon as the information processing process is over, if you have mastered all this, and set yourself up for it, that is, everything happens to us exactly as far as we understand physiology. If we don't understand, we are doing something at the unconscious levels. But it's very important that when you understand this, that you begin to form some images for yourself. This is how everything will work out for you. So, after all the information processing has ended, and the prophylaxis has passed, the person should wake up. He wakes up for a short moment. This is the so-called hour of the bull. And after that, it is very important to fall asleep. You probably possess all sorts of auto-training techniques when you relax, switch off and fall asleep. And it is at this moment that information comes in, extremely important, in order to make future decisions. That is, your consciousness is turned off, and the unconscious levels of the psyche are open. And with you there proceeds simply a processing of what came to you during the day, now at the unconscious levels of the psyche, and you need to make a decision in the morning. Why does the Russian people not have a single proverb that does not have the deepest philosophy behind it, inconceivably deep? Why do we say the morning is wiser than the evening? It's not just for nothing. The fact is that if in the evening you have some problem that is very important and fundamental for life, you possess a large amount of information, it is somewhere unverified, and a decision needs to be made, then you need to be guided by what comes up in you in the morning, because the processing of this problem will take place at the unconscious levels of the psyche. But since their capabilities, as we said, are 8 orders of magnitude greater, this information will be analyzed taking into account the experience of all your previous generations, taking into account all the experience that you had, taking into account the information glimpsed by you, but you did not attach importance to this, but it got into the unconscious levels of the psyche. And when the information is processed at the unconscious levels of the psyche, then in the morning you have this picture of what needs to be done, and you will have it at the unconscious levels of the psyche. But the most important thing is to learn how to bring this information from the unconscious levels of the psyche to the level of consciousness. Because in the unconscious levels of the psyche, it is not formed in the form of some text file. That is, you will not see a picture. It happens to people sometimes that text comes. But this requires very serious training. In general, they say that all this comes at the level of certain intuitive sensations. I wake up, I decide, no, I won't go there, I will go there. This is exactly what you need to do, despite all your deepest calculations. Intuitive insights are the most powerful apparatus of human ability. You need to rely on them. A person is only 1/100th of what he really is if he thinks that everything is decided at the level of consciousness. No, it is necessary to rely, first of all, on intuitive insight. I work with a team that has a 1,000-year tradition, and the relation to dreams is as follows. Everything that is seen in a dream is written in the left column in a certain journal. Everything that happens in life is written in the right column. Everything that happens personally with you, in your family, at work, in the country. And if you keep such information regularly, then for you specifically, you can establish certain keys of the interconnections of the images that you see in a dream with the events that occur in life. Therefore, when they tell you about the solution to dreams, it is kind of close, but not very. That is, it is impossible to interpret a dream for every person just like that. The dream can only be solved by having keys, and they are individual for everyone. Therefore, if you have revealed your own keys, then you can predict what is happening to you, and, anticipating some undesirable events, you can leave this algorithmics, because in vain the fatalists believe that everything is already predetermined by fate. There is no need to resist. Far from it. Each person really does have a matrix of destiny, a matrix of predetermination beyond the framework of which he cannot go, but it is very wide. And within the boundaries of the framework of this matrix, there is a mass of keys. These are like railroad switches. That is, every day you come across some crossroad, and you can go here and there, and you yourself determine your destiny. And you need to shape your destiny at the level of intuitive insights. They can never be replaced by anything else. No calculations, no advice. Now I want to say a few words that humanity has accumulated a lot of serious experience of purpose-oriented perversion of the integral perception of the world and imposition of a false world understanding. It is this algorithmics that I would like to explain to you now. To do this, I have a picture drawn on the board. So the algorithmics of blocking the world understanding at the human level. It is used as standard in any field. Economics, politics, art, anywhere. The point is that there is always some alternative. There is a lie and there is a truth. And this alternative, lie and truth, it is at the top, what is drawn, a person is standing, and he chooses this or this. The choice between falsehood and truth, as a rule, is proposed to be made only by the initiated, at least for the last 3,000 years, when you and I live within the framework of the biblical conception of governance, and when there are schemes for the global concealment of fundamentally significant information. Then creation is always divided like this. There is a lie and there is truth. Initiates have the right to choose between this or this. As for the crowd, the lie is split into two components, alternatives to each other, and the crowd is offered to choose between lie number 1 and lie number 2. Here is how the algorithmics works. For example, for the crowd, guys, for Russia, what is after all better, socialism or capitalism? Here you figure it out because socialism seems to be good for something, but it turns out that the problem is not in this, but the problem is in who prints the money. If you yourself print your own money and don't borrow, then you will be fine. If you don't understand this algorithmics, clearly and understandably stated in the Bible, in the book of Deuteronomy, I read word for word, and thou shalt lend unto many nations, and thou shalt not borrow, and thou shalt reign over many nations, but they shall not reign over thee. It turns out that everything is simple. One country prints money and sends it around the rest of the globe, while in another country there are pseudoscientists who show that, no, you can't print money here. What is the difference? Print your own paper or bring a green paper wagon. Paper is paper. Inflation does not depend on whether you have red or green paper in circulation. Nevertheless, here is an absolute mess. It is imposed and somehow passes in the minds of people. And when people do not understand that the algorithmics are acting here, at the level of the credit financial system, and they are told, guys, sort it out there. In 1917 there is one revolution, in 1991 there is another revolution, and now they are swinging here, and they will continue to swing until we reach the level of global world understanding, and until we remove these algorithmics for blocking our understanding of what is happening. They will say to you, well guys, let's figure it out. Which is better, plan or market? And this is a pointless question. This is a false question in its essence. A question that swings you in this place between two situations that are absolutely unacceptable for practice. Because the plan and the market are two interconnected elements. The result can only be obtained when a rigidly planned economy is complemented by market regulation. It is impossible to describe everything. Therefore, the global vector of the country's development is strictly planned. Demographically conditioned needs are written down. That is, those who want to drive a Mercedes take buckets of caviar, these are his problems. But in order for a person to simply have a brain to work, he needs to be dressed, shod, he needs housing, minimal food. The more you eat, the worse your health. That is, you need to know the measure. Undereating, overeating, they are equally harmful for any person. Therefore, if you adjust the vector of objectives to demographically conditioned needs, then it becomes clear how to develop the country. This is a problem of the state, and everything else, as it were, the market must decide. Therefore, it is absolutely wrong to build some kind of alternative. It is inherently false. It leads to false alternatives. Or take the millennial dispute about what is after all primary, matter or consciousness. And so they swing it back and forth for centuries. Here matter is better, here consciousness is primary, and so on. Whole schools of philosophy. There are philosophers materialists, philosophers idealists. But you probably noticed, at least in my life I had a lot of acquaintances with a philosophical education. What distinguishes them is that they can talk very nicely in their audience, argue with each other, they can show you their erudition, but as a rule, in no practical matter are they stronger than those who have never heard of this philosophy at all. Why? Yes, because this is a purpose-oriented distortion of the world understanding through these philosophical schools. Because in reality, creation is arranged principally differently. Matter and information, matter and consciousness, these are inseparable substances. That is, there is no matter simply. Matter is matter only because it has some informational characteristics. If there are no informational characteristics, then there is no matter either. There is no information without a material carrier. Therefore, the question at the stage of its posing is meaningless. And if people begin to read and study these philosophical schools, then they fall under this algorithmics, and their true world understanding is blocked. Because they are slipped now one lie, now another, the holisticness of the perception of the world is violated. This is how the algorithmics of the perversion of the world understanding works, and it is standard in any question. We will talk and look at this picture every time, and you will see and understand that it all works flawlessly. They will say to you, who is more right, Serbs or Croats? Zhuganov with his Camarilla and Zhirinovsky will say, guys, let's form volunteer detachments, protect our brothers. Our Democrats will say, Russians are fascists in Chechnya, and so on. If you take Yugoslavia, there have always been two evil-minded people, whose tasks were to play the rest into a kind of global slaughter. The only one who understood these scenarios was Alexander III, because he did not go through this school when a person's consciousness is blocked. You know that he came to reign somewhat unexpectedly for those who prepared Tsars. So what he said about today's Yugoslavia, you can say exactly the same. For everything that happens in the Balkans, I will not give the life of even one Russian soldier. This is a literate position, because they will tell you, is this one or that one better? These are two evil-minded people grappling with each other, and let them sort it out. What have we got to do with it? It is nice that this information goes to the top level today. Defense Minister Ivanov recently said, "No, but what has Macedonia to do with it? We don't participate there. This is a literate position. This is provocation, which is arranged. And we are told, who is better there? Who is better in Chechnya? And in Chechnya, international terrorism works. What does the Chechen have to do with it? What does the Russian have to do with it?" This setup and development is completely obvious. Which is better, dictatorship or democracy? But neither one nor the other. This is a deliberately false message. Who is better, Zhirinovsky or Gaidar? Well, is it really incomprehensible to anyone today that the entire party mass is a single mechanism governed from one center? In order to govern this or that country, you need to calculate the mood of the electorate, and under each bloc, you need to put your own leader and finance everyone. Probably your audience understands that Zhirinovsky, Zhuganov, Gaidar, Yavlinsky are financed from one wallet. They can be financed through whichever intermediaries, but this is one team. They have nothing meaningful, nothing significant. That is, they will, like Zhuganov, say, anti-people regime, Yeltsin's gang on trial, but these are emotions. And what? Zhuganov once said something meaningful? I met with him in the St. Petersburg Forum. Fortunately, we were closely acquainted before. I handed in the text of my speech and said, "Gennady Andreevich, if you continue to hide all this, then everything that you do in relation to our people, you will have to answer for all this." And yet, not a sound since then. They will talk about anything, but not about some fundamentally significant moments, like governance. It is true, real, and not what they talk about on television. When we talk about the formation of the world understanding, it is very important to regress from these stereotypes, rise above these disputes, and go to the level of methodology, and say, "No guys, this spectacle is not for me. You argue with each other, but I have a different idea of the world." I would like to note a very important point from the point of view of the formation of the world understanding. These are musical images. This is very serious. The only thing that works in culture directly at the unconscious level of the psyche is music. Regardless of whether you are listening to it or not listening, whether you want to listen to it or not, if you have a certain musical background, all this is directly loaded into the unconscious levels of the psyche. And then the algorithmics of your behavior, your worldview, will directly depend on what you have heard. You know that in ancient times, wars began through musical rhythms. Nobody said anything, just a certain rhythmics activated, and war began, and so on. Therefore, the system of initiation through music is known. That is, if a child at a certain age is played some musical plots, then this child is egressed from this algorithmics, and in principle it is impossible to block him. And this is done with the help of musical images. In my practice of communication, I have such people who were initiated through music. And music can be both a means of healing and a means of undermining genetics. This is very important to understand. Each person has their own genetics and their own resonators. And if you sometimes listen to music and goosebumps run over your body, this means that the rhythmics of this music is adequate to those genetic resonators that are characteristic for you. Other people in Africa, for example, have a different system of resonators, and for them these rhythms will not be adequate. Therefore, in no case in music should one succumb to any fashion. It's fashionable to listen to it, and I let my child listen to it too. It is very dangerous. It is simply dangerous for the health. In our system there are so-called vocal therapy techniques. The fact is that all the vowel sounds of the Russian language, they are associated with one or another system. If you chant the sound E for a long time, then you will feel how your brain resonates under this sound. That is, the letter E is connected with the brain. A is connected with the region of the heart. U with the region of the lungs. O is the spinal column. If you pronounce these sounds in a chant, then you will feel how they are given to one or another part of the body. So if you are unwell or want to carry out diagnostics, then you can do it with the help of vocals. Just use a stopwatch to note each sound, how long you can sing it. And if one of the sounds you get is shorter than all the others, you can either go to the doctor or just start chanting this sound. And if you use the method of chanting this sound, its duration will be brought up to the level of all the others. Then you will have a normalization of those processes that are somehow disturbed in the body. Because all we can do in relation to ourselves is exclusively by mobilizing our own forces of the organism. In the practice of our team, contacting doctors is considered unacceptable. This is only in some kind of emergency, special situations. Since you must understand this, the methodology of organizing healthcare is in principle flawed. And here in no case should people be accused of something, it's just that the methodology of organizing these cases is flawed. That is, what is the healthcare system? It should be called differently in general. To say it in essence, this is the Ministry of Diseases. Why? Because the more patients there are, the better the ministry. That is, you know that medicine is the coolest business after narcotics and alcohol. Pharmacies are growing on every corner. Well, imagine that tomorrow all people stopped getting sick. And this is a big loss for the global earning office. Therefore, if we wanted to have a true healthcare system in the country, then it should be organized on a fundamentally different basis. That is, it should receive a budget, and then from this budget, well guys, if it went for treatment, well, sorry. If it didn't go to treatment, keep this money for yourself. Keep all the money to promote a healthy lifestyle, for the dissemination of some knowledge about health. Provide yourself normally. Then it would be possible to go to the doctor, because he is interested in your health. When you go to the doctor now, he is interested in making sure that you are not ill at the level of consciousness. That is, this is all going on at the level of unconscious algorithmics, and it really works. Therefore, it is necessary to be very careful with the system of official medicine. It is very important for today, especially in your affairs, to take into account and know all the principles of programming the psyche of man, all the methods of social magic, television sorcery. There is probably nothing here which is incomprehensible to you. What magic is, what sorcery is. These are all things that have been worked out for a long time. They absolutely really work. This is some kind of informational laying out, referring to some subject, and then it is redirected to some real subject. And with this subject, there takes place that which one did with some kind of dummy back in ancient times. For example, in order to kill a mammoth, they first portrayed some kind of replica, fought with it, and then they had all this information laying out in real life. In Rus they say, tell a man 3 times that he is a pig and he will grunt. This is really so, because the most important thing is the formation of thought forms. In life, in the material world, nothing happens, no events appear until a certain thought form takes shape. That is, If there are some people who wanted acts of terrorism to take place on the 20th of such and such a month, then 2 weeks before that, it's necessary to start talking about this and form corresponding thought forms that on the 20th, someone, somewhere, there will probably be terrorism there. If we talk about it, it will happen. These are the tried and tested techniques of very ancient social magic. These techniques are most clearly presented in the little golden calf. The little golden calf is a kind of social magic in relation to the ongoing perestroika. That is, Ostap Bender is the hero of today with his 120 relatively honest ways of making money. Ilf and Petrov were initiated people, and they, in an artistic form, reflected some global social phenomena that occur in life. In chapter 21 of the Little Golden Calf, which is called The End of Rookery, you can see the following plot. The restless mind of Chamberlain Mitrich languished with idleness, and he noticed that the old woman next door was pouring kerosene into her oil stove, and he thought that she would probably burn this house down. He ran urgently to the insurance office, insured all his property. The rumor about this swept through the entire suburb. People began to insure their property, then take it out for friends and relatives. And then a quote. Everything was clear, the house was doomed, it could not avoid going up in smoke. And actually at midnight, the apartment flared up simultaneously in 6 different places. This is a situation that should not be taken as a joke. Through such things, the most globally serious information is given. In reality, this is how governance towards processes flows. If you see, for example, a car driving down the street, be sure that before this car appeared, the idea of this car appeared, an image appeared, drawings appeared. Had there been no idea, there would have been no car. And any events are the same. This is programming in its purest form. Here, for example, about today's affairs. Listiev, everything that happened to him, he built it himself. All thoughts and words must be taken very seriously. You must understand that in addition to the separate individual, there is the so-called collective psyche, there is the all-people psyche, and these informational layings out, the thoughts of everyone, they can converge. And the principle of the so-called informational domino is known. That is, there is a certain chain, and in the domino, as is known, the knuckle is dropped, and the knuckles go. Once, such a figure appears, the knuckles immediately fall into place. If even one knuckle is missing, then this does not happen. In the same way, in thoughts and words, there is a certain collective reason. In this collective reason, this link is missing. You literally brought something here with your thought, you closed this chain, and it fell on your head, as it was done by Listiev. So that you understand questions of governance, there is perhaps no more dangerous program than Field of Miracles. What is Field of Miracles? We do not have a single TV program that does not have a global strategic meaning. Field of Miracles is the programming of the psyche of the younger generation to receive material goods outside of creation. That is, the child looks and sees that dad is breaking his back from morning until night, digging potatoes, doing something else. They are always in poverty, there is nothing. But some uncle comes along, spins the wheel and wins a car. This goes to the unconscious levels of the psyche. No one will tell him, the parents will not say anything, and at the unconscious level he will be tuned in for the reception of something somewhere. One of Listiev's last programs was dedicated to a killer. He interviewed the killer and asked very curious questions. The last question, tell me, do you really always fire a control shot? If Listiev was interested in this, then all this in life was given to him in all the details. Therefore, words, they generate the events that Listiev brought down on his head. Therefore, if, for example, to talk about terrorism, you can fight it as much as you like. All this is an absolutely pointless occupation. Terrorism will last exactly as long as television advertises it. Here you try, with the information I am talking about, to go out with it on television for 10 minutes. You know how much they will charge? When I do something, it's like you have to save money for a year, and then you come out with some information. And if a terrorist attack took place in Moscow, I was simply amazed. All channels broadcast continuously for 2 weeks. But this does not happen just like that. Miracles do not happen. This is the direct financing of those who carried out this act of terrorism. Isn't that clear? Terrorist attacks occur only insofar as they are later shown on television. There is no other motivation. Well, imagine, something happened, 1 or 2 people died. So what? If no one knows about this, what is the point of these attacks? Terrorist attacks are needed only in view of the fact that then, during the week, it will be broadcast on television. If we calculate the advertising budget of the terrorist attack in Moscow, then it is hundreds of millions of dollars. That is, hundreds of millions of dollars were spent on advertising this event, at least. Count all the time of the TV channels. I don't understand why these sensible thoughts somehow don't make their way. But we are ready to systematically present you with very short notes. But that we are presenting is one thing. But it's another thing those who decide these questions and say, guys, how long can you keep taking us for fools? So we are fighting terrorism, or are we developing it? If we are developing it, then set a specific task. Then we understand what we are doing. If we are fighting it, how can we fight if all our funds are invested exclusively in advertising terrorism? Therefore, in your system, Babkov Filip Denisovich is familiar with our information in detail. And, by the way, he assisted in solving some questions. So, in his recent interview, he cited an example from the Soviet era. Then they understood the technique of social magic. Then it was not shown. It was not simply without reason that it was not shown. Because what you show, then a month later you will see this in life. Where did all these atrocities in American schools come from? Only because it also slips in there. But American television and ours are night and day. There is not even 100th part of what falls on our heads. And, nevertheless, there are shootings of children in schools and so on. From where? This is through such television programs, action films and so on. And Filip Denisovich Babkov gave an example in this interview. Back in Soviet times, there was a case of self-immolation, if I'm not mistaken, in Lithuania or Latvia. And they wrote about it in the newspapers. And so it went. These events went all over the country. Until they stopped supplying information, it did not stop. The second case that he cited, a young couple went out onto the balcony on their wedding day and threw themselves from the 9th floor and died. It was shown on television. And there instantly started a series of the same events with newlyweds all over the country. If you are shown a case of how a young man shoots his colleagues in the army, this is the programming of these events. You understand that if it is shown on television, it costs a lot of money. Shown for what? In order to repeat these cases. How does it work? A soldier sits relaxed and gazes at his television and sees it all. And for him, all this is driven into the unconscious levels of the psyche. And tomorrow, when the next day comes, out of 100,000 people who have viewed this news, one of them has a difficult everyday situation. When his hands are also tied behind his back, something else, and from the unconscious levels of the psyche, the algorithm which he saw on television is activated. And exactly what is shown on television will happen. This is the ABC, without understanding which, talking about the fight against terrorism, except for laughter, evokes nothing in those people who are engaged in real governance. And not at this level here, trying to pump something. I have touched upon the national idea in a nutshell. I really want to emphasize to you the paradoxes of the image of Ivan the Fool. This directly reveals the world understanding which is characteristic of our people, a different world understanding. When I was working with children, a 5th grade girl brought an essay. They were asked at school to write an essay, How do you understand the image of Ivanushka the fool? And so she writes an essay, composes a fairy tale. The overseas knights have gathered, the king gives his daughter to the one who wins all battles. Our fool Ivan and 2 more knights reach the final. And here is the last test. The river. They are on the other side of the river and start to swim. Whoever comes first becomes the husband of the king's daughter. They swim, Ivanushka rushes forward, and at this time a boat passes and a child falls from the boat into the water. Ivanushka, since he is a fool, turns aside and begins to save this child. He saves the child, returns him to the boat, and comes last. As always with children, a happy ending. The king's daughter breaks free from the hands of the winner and runs to our Ivan. You see, for a different world perception, he is a fool, because there is a specific task and it must be solved. But in the worldview of Russian people, this is normal. Now I wanted to touch upon the main question, because without understanding this, everything else, everything that I have said, is 1/100th of one problem. If you understand it, then your life will change in a fundamental way. I say this not for nothing after having read something. I say this having checked everything from beginning to end in my own life and the lives of my loved ones, family. This is the concept of religions. When you start talking about religion, people say, well, religion. Do not dismiss it like that. For millennia, certain institutions have been working in parallel with your system, which is tumbling as it is, and for some reason that system is standing still. Therefore, it will not be possible to brush it off. If you really want to understand something, you don't need to say, well, religion, God, all this does not concern me at all. This is the deepest illusion. This suggests that a person does not want to form any kind of world understanding at all. It turns out that the deepest illusion is formed at this level in the part of the question about God. Here too, there is a truth, and here there is a lie. And here are 2 lies about God. Between them they swing us. In order to understand how this is done, I will draw a very simple picture for you on the board, so that a complete image is preserved, because words are words. Any attempts to prove that God is are absolutely fruitless and meaningless. Any attempts to prove that God is not, they are just as completely fruitless and meaningless. Neither one nor the other is in principle provable by logical means. Therefore, one cannot relate to this at the level of reasoning and theory. You just need to observe and comprehend, and you need to verify it all on yourself. If you are really interested in this, start checking this algorithmics. Everything will be clear to you, and everything will work for you from what I will say now. These things are available as a rule to a greater or lesser extent for those who are tech-savvy people, who think that they do not believe in God. Now, if a person believes in God, goes to church regularly, it is much more difficult to work with him. If I give this information somewhere within 3 to 4 hours, then as a rule, people understand this. But you see, today's lecture is just informative. I do not set it as my objective for you to come out and understand everything. I set one objective, for you to try on some questions, some problems. Ask yourself the question, listen, maybe there really is something here. If you have such questions, then further circumstances will develop in such a way that you will get access to this information. How does creation work? Creation is the biggest secret that is hidden from humanity, and a lot of money is working for this. Intellect in the universe is hierarchical, and there are some discrete levels that do not communicate with each other. We start from scratch. If we take the axis of conditional intellect up like this, Then here we mark the 0 level. This is mineral life, that is, stone, asphalt minerals. They cannot perceive any information from the outside and do something with themselves. If you take the next level, for example, a head of cabbage or any flower on the window, you will agree that this is no longer a stone from the point of view of conventional intellect. By intellect, we understand the ability to receive some information from the outside and, in accordance with this information, to change some of our parameters. Any plant turns to follow the sun. Wherever the sun is, it turns there. If it is dry, the roots go deeper. If it is damp, the roots go higher. Mineral organic matter. Something they take, something they don't take. Plants have the ability to read certain information from the outside and, in accordance with this information, to take these or those actions. We take the next level, the animal kingdom. When a goat approaches a head of cabbage and pinches off a leaf, for the head of cabbage, this is an intervention from above. Because if you imagine yourself as the head of cabbage, there is a certain perception of the world. There is a perception of moisture, air, sun, and something else. This is everything that the cabbage understands about the world. And suddenly, once, everything seems fine with you, but a leaf is gone. But a head of cabbage in principle cannot have any idea of such a creature as a goat, because this is a contact with a higher level of organization of intellect. And from this level in principle is not cognizable. This is simply a property of creation. We take the next level, man. Man is a different level of perception of creation, has a thinking ability and so on. That is, even if 10 dogs get together, they will never understand who you are. All the same, they will perceive you as the one who feeds them and takes them out onto the lawn, and the rest is beyond their understanding. Therefore, the main mistake and misfortune that dominates our unconscious levels of the psyche is that man in this hierarchy is the pinnacle of creation. Nothing else is possible on an intellectual level. This is the deepest delusion. It is generally clear from elementary logic that this is a delusion. Why? Because much of what is happening in the world we do not understand. How is it all created? What is the universe? What is infinity? And so on. Therefore, for any sane person, it is clear that there is another level above the level of man, which in the terminology of our team is called higher reason. You can put the sign of identity and write God. Don't let the word scare you, because a word is simply a code. It is important to understand the phenomenon itself. Probably it is more correct to understand the higher reason, because God is precisely vicious stereotypes, deliberately embedded in our consciousness, so that we do not understand how creation is arranged. The higher reason communicates with the person through messengers. Among the messengers were Moses, Buddha, Christ, Muhammad. At different times they were given absolutely one and the same information from one and the same center. I know the Quran by heart. I can quote the Bible to you in many places. We have studied this thoroughly and in detail. After Christ, everything in the Bible was rewritten. Everything in the Bible is after the Nicaean Council. This is 300 years later. Such nonsense that Christ is God during his life was difficult to push through. 300 years later, it passed. At the first Council of Nicaea, it was decided by majority vote that Christ is God. Christ is a messenger, and we have the utmost respect for him. Kremlin strategists say, "Are you against Christianity?" Excuse me, but what do you mean by Christianity? If we talk about me, then I simply revere Christ as much as he deserves, as a man, because he brought holy things to people. But, excuse me, everything that was written after Christ, what kind of Christianity is this? These are inventions in order to fool people. There is nothing left of what Christ said. But the only thing is that if you take the wisdom of Solomon in the Bible and take the book of the prophet Isaiah, then everything will become clear to you as to why in most Western editions Solomon's prophecy is thrown away. Because there it is about fundamentally different gods, and there it is impossible to combine one with the other. Therefore, this is the biggest secret, and a person can only achieve happiness in all aspects of his activity if he comprehends his place in creation. If he thinks of himself as the center, has an I-centric worldview, then he will never succeed. If he perceives himself as part of this creation, which is organized in a completely different way, with intellectual levels located above him, then he can build this dialogue with the higher reason. This is practiced with small skills that are fairly simple. Therefore, understanding this is extremely important. I'll explain something else now. What is the higher reason? God, you can call it whatever you like. Let's just write the word God for simplicity, but again, this is not the God that you have heard about all your life. From this level of organization of the intellect, information is given through the prophets, who are attributed to the number of prophets I have told you, and the living prophet is Sai Baba. He lives in Puttaparthi in India, and information about him is available on the internet at bog.ru. I had a lot of mystical phenomena in my life after I began to deal with the issue of God. I drove with this question around the globe, checking these questions specifically in order to understand how the world is arranged. And for half a year I was persuaded to visit India and meet with Sai Baba. Every morning at least 6,000 people gather there, hoping to at least see him from afar. I was told that since you are connected with such a global system of representation of creation in Russian civilization, I am involved in this knowledge because our team to which I belong is engaged in this, and therefore I possess this information. And suddenly, by some miracle, you will be able to get in touch with Sai Baba. Everyone comes there for a month, 6,000 people, 4 stadiums. We were there for 3 days. On the first day, passing by, he just came up to me and asked, "Where are you from?" I said, "From St. Petersburg," and he took us to him. There were 3 of us. On the second day, he again approached us and took us to his place. We had an hour-and-a-half conversation with him. We were holy to the crowd. Then they tried to touch us. It's so funny because we understand how the world is arranged, and for them it's just a kind of faith, a kind of mysticism. We realize that Sai Baba immediately fixes these egregorial connections, understands what information we are connected with and what lies behind it. There was a very serious conversation. So I wanted to say from this picture that each person is given the opportunity to directly communicate with God. Prophets exist to further feed a person's information. But in order for a person not to make this connection, surrogates are slipped to him. What are churches of all denominations? Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, and so on. All churches are designed to hide the true ideas of man about creation and about the higher reason. A person is initially drawn to something from birth. He understands that there is something in the world somewhere, and he tries to comprehend it. The church are brokers who make money on the idea of God, and nothing more. Come to me, give money, and I'll organize everything for you. The closer you are to the church, the further you are from God. If a person wants to really understand something in creation, then he must look for it outside the church. When they say to me, "You are a believer, so you are a Christian or what?" It cannot be that a person believes God directly and at the same time would attribute himself to some kind of church hierarchy. They are simply antipodes. It is impossible to understand how the world is arranged, to believe God, and go to church, because the apotheosis of atheism is the church. And Leo Tolstoy, who understood these things, described it all quite colorfully. What is important to understand in these matters? In order for a person not to understand what God is, I will take the previous picture. This false alternative has been slipped into him. That is, the truth is that there is a certain higher reason that is above us, and it is the same for everyone living on earth. And the lie is that there is no such one God for everyone living on earth. This is the truth for the initiated. So is there a higher reason or not? And what is for the crowd? And the crowd is taken here to this level. Lie number one is slipped to it. This is materialistic atheism. There is no God, no messengers. The person is simply like this. He simply eats, sleeps, and that's all. No, excuse me, this is not how the world is arranged. And the soul is not at all some kind of mysticism. Our body is a temporary container for the soul. Materialistic atheism claims that there is nothing, neither God nor messengers, but only the material world. And there is a second type of lie. This is idealistic atheism. This is the substitution of a kind of surrogate for ideas about true God, about the higher reason. To some, to slip Christ in the form of God, to others, to slip Allah, and to others still, someone else. For what? But in order to push people into wars. You will not find one military conflict which would not have been involved in this. These have Allah, these have Christ, these are Huguenots, and these are Catholics. Why implement all this with the help of the Church? Only in order to clash together entire peoples with their heads. What is happening in the world now? A global clash between Russia and the Islamic world is now being prepared on the globe. Everything that is done in separate parts is a little warm-up, a little pre-tuning. The main thing is to play off Christianity against Islam on a large scale. What are we doing? We show that, as it turns out, the Quran is actually our book. What is happening in Chechnya is simply not close to what is written in the Quran. It is impossible to talk about the Quran by some pictures on television, by some rumors. In order to understand the Quran, you need to take it and read it. Another thing is that it's presented in a form blocked for direct perception. That is, the Quran has 114 surahs, and they are presented like this. First the largest, then shorter, and they were given to Muhammad in a completely different sequence. If you read the Quran in the correct sequence, then a lot is revealed. In many places in the Quran, Jesus is like an absolutely holy person. Therefore, we study absolutely all the scriptures. We do not see any difference between them except for the perversions that have been introduced into them. If something is locked in one of these scriptures, then it will never come to a true world understanding. If you have an idea about the arrangement of creation, then prayer is nothing more than a mental appeal of a person to this higher reason. You just need to understand this phenomenon. You can contact him in the forest, by the river, in your apartment. That is where you feel normal. And the most curious thing is that if you start to understand this and do it, that is, make prayers, then your prayers will begin to come true. That is, it is impossible to prove it logically, but it is so. This has been verified many times by all our people. If you turn with prayer, but not with some selfish problems of your own, if you see some kind of unpraviousness, if you see that something is wrong, and you turn with prayer, then it starts to come true. What is prayer? These are by no means some thoughtless canonical texts learned by heart. This is simply an appeal in your own words, an appeal to this phenomenon which we are not given to understand. This is something for us that is uncognizable. Like for the head of cabbage, the goat is uncognizable. But the facts of turning in that direction, they all come true. I just say this from my own experience, and this algorithmics of interaction, it exists. There are many ways to violate it. Well, the first thing is when a person is being driven to church. Where does the church lead? The church leads you to egregorial levels, but by no means to God. Therefore, this idea is fundamental. Without understanding it, everything else is difficult to understand and perceive. To give some personal examples, this is not very indicative. The fact is that the manifestations of the higher reason, in relation to each person, they are absolutely individual. That is, there are no repetitions. God is not a magician who comes out and arranges general performances for the crowd. No. Each person is given this only to the measure that he believes and understands it, and refers to it. Just 3 days ago there was a dispute with the former vice-rector of the Institute of Culture. His life had already made him understand. He had many situations to understand what, from there, works. He says to me, "Well, I understand that there is a higher reason. I myself was convinced of this. But you are in vain absolutizing the possibilities. It cannot reach every person." Stop. This is the worst thing. It is very clearly necessary to distinguish between faith in God and faith towards God. These are completely different things. Belief in God is also one of the varieties of godlessness, when a person simply says, "Well, yes, there is a God, but he has no time for me. He has his own things there and I have mine here." All this begins to work only when the person reaches the level of faith towards God. That is, God, the highest reason, must be perceived as a certain phenomenon, knows everything about you, knows more about you than you can imagine, and wants dobro for you. He is the most dobrous, most caring. God always speaks to people in the language of life circumstances. All the chance happenings that occur with you are akin to a conversation from above. That is, if a person stumbled, fell, something happened to his car, you need to sit down and think about the reasons. If you start connecting these things with your life, then you will understand this whole logic. Who and how is talking to you? I say again that from above it is always spoken exclusively in the language of life's circumstances. As soon as a certain chance happening has occurred, you need to clearly sit down and think. And if you are honest, at least in front of yourself, you will immediately understand what this chance happening is connected with. And in this way you will avoid undesirable for yourself events. A little about prophets. Why have there never been prophets in the history of Russian civilization? Coming to the level of a prophet is very difficult. We have seen this exactly by the example of Sai Baba. Puttaparthi is a small village in the south of India. Airfields, Boeings, dozens of houses, accommodation and 4 meals a day cost $1. Miracles do not happen. If there is no money, where does all this come from? It turns out that it became clear to us that he was building some kind of global development. And those are called prophets who fell into such development. Pushkin clearly understood this. For you to understand who Pushkin is, just read Gavriliada, a very small work for which he was convicted. He wrote it at the age of 18. Pushkin received information from above. He also inherited through his father and mother both the Holy Russian Zhretsud and the ancient Egyptian Zhretsud. And on his hard drive there was such a convergence of information that allowed him to come out with this. What does the plot of Gavriliada mean? It shows that Christ is played by different forces, the devil and God and egregorial levels. What is the story? God loved the Virgin Mary for him. He sends the Archangel Gabriel to somehow prepare the ground there. Archangel Gabriel meets with Mary, they sympathize with each other, and the Virgin Mary falls asleep in the bedroom. She sees Gabriel in a dream. At this time, a tempting snake creeps into the bedroom and copulates with her. After that, the Archangel Gabriel, and only the third was God. And as a result, Christ appeared. This is the essence of the Gavriliada. Pushkin very deeply makes it clear that any prophet, he always becomes a prophet only when he fulfills some of the development of those who own money in this conception, because money is owned by those who built the soul 3,000 years ago. This work contains the following lines. Shan't attempt to make my story fall in line with Moses. He used a fiction to enslave the Jews. A whopping lie is easier to believe than a small white one, and the Jews believed him. And God rewarded him for toadying. But I'm no court historian, believe me. The important rank of prophet doesn't tempt me. That is, he shows that in order to become a prophet, you need to clearly work out commands. You need to be at court, and then you will become a prophet. Therefore, our prophets, Seraphim of Sarov, Sergius of Radonezh, in their capabilities significantly surpassed everything we know, but they did not have the same toadying mind. Now there is a bit of such a practical plane in families. Here is a family, husband and wife. It is very important to understand from the point of view of the future of the family that a man and a woman belong to fundamentally different psychotypes. What does it look like? A woman is predetermined by nature to give birth to a child. Therefore, for a woman, the most important thing that dominates her behavior is momentariness. Here she has a child, and she needs that at this particular moment, the child would be alive, whole, fed. That is, her orientation is predeterminedly for very short periods of time. The wife gives birth, the man goes on a business trip at that time. He leaves in the morning, comes back in the evening, the child is already asleep. That is, he has no orientation towards such momentary problems. He has long-term problems. For example, after 3 years, something needs to be decided with a dacha or an apartment, and he lives in much longer intervals of time. What does it look like? From the point of view of the law of normal distribution, if you take a time interval, then women will have this distribution. Well, there are, of course, women like Margaret Thatcher who think 100 years ahead, but basically most women live for a period of 35 days. If, let's say, you want, relatively speaking, to propel someone to deputy, he can be a bad person as much as he wants, but if you show him very beautifully on television over the course of 3 days, then the women will go and vote for him, because this is their nature. If you take men, then they have a fundamentally different distribution. It is like this. That is, men are guided by much longer time intervals. Now, if the time is here, then you understand that there are a lot of men who think in terms of 10 years, 100 years. We think in terms of 1,000 years. We form processes like that. And therefore, if this understanding is not there, the woman's destiny is to take the family away from some kind of instant danger. That is, this is especially evident in the example of boys and girls. So there is some kind of turmoil, somewhere some kind of cliff, somewhere some kind of thin log, the boy will definitely go there and fall there. Why? Because their functions are different. A woman must do everything to bypass this zone of danger. The boy must train, because the function of a man, when he is already in the zone of danger, is how to egress from this zone of danger. A woman starts up hysterics. A man, on the contrary, shows his qualities in this situation. Boys, on the unconscious level of the psyche, begin this training when they train in various dangers, because later in life they may have to learn this. And non-understanding of this leads to all sorts of conflicts, because a woman has such an orientation, buy me a ring. The man, not realizing this kind of long-term behavior, refuses. And they start conflicts because of little things. He says no. But why? Well, because he has an orientation for 5 years, and he understands that if today there is a ring, tomorrow there is something else, then the objective that he set at an unconscious level for implementation in 5 years will not be realized. It is also very important to develop thinking algorithmics with children. That is, not just to help them solve the problem, but simply sit down, enter the child's biofield, and solve the problem with him. Not speak, but think with him, because we are biofield creatures, and biofields work. And the child will develop a certain algorithmics, which will then allow him to remember the situation and enter into the solution of any problem, and not just some specific one. In order to block the possibilities of human intuitive insights, the possibilities of the brain, the sole most powerful tool has been invented. This is alcohol, tobacco, drugs. This is a genetic weapon that was invented by the ancient Egyptian jretzes, even back then, when they began to degrade into pseudo-jretzhood, to destroy these delicate structures of the brain, and in order that connections with the higher reason and intuitive insights would be blocked. How does this happen? You probably know that alcohol is a genetic weapon, and there are no other semantic loads in this. In order to cover the whole society, then 1 heroin, the 2nd marijuana, the 3rd alcohol, the 4th vodka, the 5th wine, the 6th beer. In reality, there is absolutely no difference between beer and heroin in terms of functional purpose. In order for people not to understand this, traditions and customs have been introduced from within. That is, if it is a birthday, then you need to drink. If it's a wedding, then you need to drink, and so on. This is done artificially. It is done through films and so forth. You will not find a single film where the wine-drinking process is not shown. And what is the process of intoxication in general? For some reason, no doctor will tell you this. When a person has consumed alcohol, the alcohol removes the grease from the red blood cells. Such red blood cells, such as discs, that are surrounded by a layer of lipid. The lipid layer is disrupted, and erythrocytes begin to stick together. The initiates call this the great bunch effect. The erythrocytes do not flow in separate pieces, but in bunches, and when they enter the fine structures of the brain, they are there physiologically stuck in the thin vessels, precisely in these fine structures of the brain. And when they get stuck there, the blood stops flowing to the neurons that remained behind this thrombus. Therefore, in reality, the state of intoxication is nothing more than the cessation of blood supply to the individual micro-areas of the brain. As soon as the blood stops flowing, the head begins to rattle or buzz. In fact, after that, what happens? These are the erythrocytes to which the blood supply has ceased. They physiologically die, and dead tissues form in the brain. About 1 million neurons die from 100 grams of alcohol. And in total we have from 20 to 40 billion of them. 1 million seems to be a little, but they break these long chains. And after that, this formed dead tissue must be removed so that the person does not die. These are also defense mechanisms that work like that. I will cite such a physiological phrase. Speaking at a large forum in Japan, I also cited it to show that they do not consider us suckers. that they understand a lot in Russia, although so far it has not been given to say it out loud. But nevertheless, you cannot hide the cat in the bag. I gave them this phrase: everyone who has consumed alcohol the next morning urinates with their own brains. This phrase sounds so physiological, and the doctors told me that it is absolutely accurate and impeccable from the point of view of physiology. That is, ultimately, the dead brain is removed with urine from the organism, and holes remain in the brain, which are perfectly visible under a microscope, as if a moth had devoured it. I was introduced to this information only later. It was impossible to live and not drink in the party organs. The first connections with something, they appear 3 years after the last sip of alcohol. Alcohol can be defeated only at the worldview level. That is, when you say that yes, it is a genetic weapon. I drink and I also pay. I tell many guys, I understand if you were paid, you drink a glass, they give you 100 rubles, but when you yourself drink and you yourself pay, I don't understand. It is the same as if cockroaches started buying chlorophyll for themselves. This is the same algorithmics. It is no different, because it really is a means of destroying genetics, and it does not carry any other semantic loads. As for the concept of conceptual power, I won't touch on it, but so that you understand, the legislative, executive, and judicial powers have nothing to do with governance. The overall function of governance is conceptual power. It has 6 priorities. This is my book. It is dedicated to this. Therefore, if someone is interested, you can just take it and read. And the last thing that I also would like to leave you, a film called Rurik and His Brothers. The point is that in the history of the Russian civilization, we kind of know everything, how we were fooled. Another thing is that still the mass media is not ours. But you remember perhaps the words of Chuchev, who said, think about the deep meaning. A day there was when God's mallets of truth sent the old church tumbling to its death, and by his own sword thoroughly run through, the high priest gasped his final dying breath. They have created all the informational shells now, and with what to fill? The same lies that have been used to powder the brains for 3,000 years? And everyone has read them. No one is interested in them. It is into these shells that we will now inject our information.